welcome to TYT Interviews. We got another great one for you guys today. Nick Hanauer. I've actually talked to Nick over the years because he's been doing wonderful things over the years. He's a self-described patriotic progressive, but it's not just self-described. It's true, as you're going to see in this interview. And look, he's wrote The True Patriot in 2007. That's a bestseller. He's got a podcast called The Other Washington now. But the reason Nick came into the news in the first place is because he is one of those millionaires who says, you know what, all the other things that most other millionaires tell you, it's not really true. Now, I don't want to get into how rich you are, although that would be a fun topic, but I do know that you sold a company to Microsoft for $6.4 billion, so God bless.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Now, I want to talk about all the different things that you've been doing and your ideas and how you're fighting against the right wing.
Sure.
But first, it seems like you're a traitor to your class. Why did you do that? Why did you screw over all the other one percenters and reveal their secrets?
Yeah. Well, you know, I think that's a great question, and probably there's something that's deeply wrong psychologically with me. But I'd like to think that I would like to think that the difference really is thinking short term versus medium or long term. So if you were a very short term thinker and wealthy, then rising inequality is fun and convenient and awesome because you're getting more and everybody else getting less. But if you're thinking about it from the medium or long term, then all rising inequality is a death spiral of falling demand. Because if workers don't have any money, then who's going to buy the stuff that the companies that I start, manage, and own, the products that we make, right? And so to say nothing of the way in which our democracy is going to come apart and the way in which that is going to lead to some very bad things happening, almost certainly to people like me.
Yeah.
Because if history can teach us nothing, it is that nothing else. It is that eventually, if you treat people bad enough, they will get pissed and do terrible things to you. And so, you know, it's just common sense to me.
Yeah, so of course I agree, but let's break it down further. So, by the way, if you're thinking, well, maybe Nick got lucky with one company that sold to Microsoft, he's actually founded or financed 30 different companies, early investor in Amazon. So, and I love the way you frame it as also, not just to be a decent human being, but also a matter of self-interest.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you see this playing out, for example, in Rio. Things have gotten so bad with income inequality in Brazil that now there's like every manner of scam and crime, et cetera. I mean, one of the Olympians they threw up on the guy so that he can go to the bathroom and clean himself up. Meanwhile, someone else takes his cameras of the cameraman covering him, yada, yada. Like, when things get desperate, it is not good news
for anybody.
For anyone, including the wealthy. Yeah. So what I'm amazed by is, and I'm curious if you've ever talked to these other guys, because I don't get a chance to talk to the Koch brothers or not necessarily the Koch brothers, but any of the other right-wingers, like, do they not understand the concept? Because somebody like the Koch brothers, they have about $80 billion between them, I think. Yeah. When is it enough? And don't they get that it's actually much, much better off for them if there is more income equality so that there's stability? Because it doesn't really matter if you have $4 billion or $40 billion. The only thing that matters, but if you have instability, then that could, right, exactly.
Yeah, you know, it's a terrific question, and I don't know the Koch brothers, so I can't speak to them directly. But you know, when I started, what I will tell you is things are changing. And that when I first started talking about economic inequality, which is a pretty long time ago. I mean, you and I, you remember in the day, right?
Yeah,
and nobody gave a shit, and you know, it was like
we were howling into the wind.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, when I first started talking about economic inequality, my peer group mostly got angry and defensive because it felt like an unwarranted attack on them and their lives and their accomplishments. And I think that's because people didn't understand the dimensions of the problem or the implications of the problem in those days. But today, you practically have to go all the way to Texas to find somebody who's moderately intelligent and wealthy who doesn't acknowledge that rising economic inequality eventually will be bad for everybody. Now the question is what to do about it. And the problem with people is that the most powerful psychological force is the need to self-justify, right? Like people just, the cognitive dissonance that is created by acknowledging that what you do is making the problem worse is very, very hard for people to deal with. And so, so you end up with these ridiculous frameworks like trickle-down economics, right? So trickle-down economics is three things. It is tax cuts for the rich, deregulation for the powerful, and wage suppression for everybody else is a theory of growth. And this is absurd, but but it's not that hard to talk yourself into if you're rich. And so you run around thinking, well, no, if I'm a job creator, and so the more money I have, the more jobs I create. So you should cut my taxes. And I'm a job creator, so the less constrained I am by regulation, the more jobs I'll create. And profits are the source of growth in our economy. So the lower your wages are, the better it will be for our economy, right? These are ridiculous ideas, but they are easy to get people to believe if they align with their self-interest. And so you have this weird thing going on where people are seeking to self-justify and kind of pushing their heads in the sand. But I do think we're making progress. I think people are beginning to realize that this is all nonsense.
So let's break it down for the people who are brainwashed into this. And by the way, it's not just the rich, and it's not just the think tanks and the politicians they fund. That unfortunately, they've done so much marketing / propaganda for that. It's come all the way down to a couple weeks ago, I was talking to an Uber driver in New Jersey, and he's like, well, I like Bernie Sanders, but increasing the minimum wage is going to cost us jobs.
Right.
He believes that.
Yes. Crazy, right? So, and the idea, the claim that if wages go up, employment will go down is the canonical example of the way in which neoclassical economists, in concert with right-wing politicians and their funders, have created this sort of alternative reality, this construct that is sort of the opposite of the truth, but is the thing that drives economic inequality. So if you can convince people that if wages go up, employment will go down, then you can be very, very sure that profits will be high and wages will be low, right? And by appealing to people in this way, in this constant way, and basically calling the idea that if wages go up, employment will go down, a law of nature, right? This whole so-called law of supply and demand, you make people believe that it's true, and you create a context within which it becomes almost impossible to raise wages. But here's the really fascinating thing, is that there is literally zero empirical evidence that raising wages kills jobs. Why? Because that's not how capitalism works, right? The fundamental dynamic in a market economy is the feedback loop between people who are buying things and people who are selling things. And when people who are buying things have more money, then people who are selling things do better and hire more workers, right? It's ecosystemic. It's like, claiming that if wages grow, jobs will shrink is as ludicrous as claiming that when plants grow, animals shrink. Nothing could be farther from the truth, right? It's patently absurd. But what's so important, and so important for your viewers to recognize, is that the claim, when jobs go up, employment comes down, sounds like a law of nature. It sounds like legit economics. What it really is a negotiating strategy. It's a con job. It's an intimidation tactic masquerading as an economic theory. So the oldest trick in the business person's wage suppression handbook, and believe me, I've run like 35 companies. Somebody comes in and asks me for a raise, and I threaten their jobs. Right? It works like a charm and has since the invention of capitalism. Saying to the broad public, if wages go up, employment will go down, saves people from having to have that one-on-one conversation. It's a way of negotiating wages at scale. So when Paul Ryan says, if we raise the minimum wage, it's going to cost millions of jobs, he's simply negotiating wages for the Koch brothers at scale.
That's such a great description.
He's doing. That's all he's doing. He's just and Cenk, you and I have to remember that, look, if I lose a job, if you lose a job, this is an inconvenient thing. You may have to move your family from one affluent suburb to another to do something else. But if you're a minimum wage worker in our country, hanging on by your fingernails with a family, you know, unemployment is an existential threat. It's hard to put your head, if you're like us, put yourself in that headspace. And you know, when you say to a group of super economically vulnerable folks, you know, if the government makes me raise wages, I'm going to have to fire you all. You're basically threatening their physical safety, right? It's like the mob. You know, I would hate for something to happen to your family, right? It's sort of like legalized assault in a certain way, and it's unconscionable. So there is a mountain of microeconomic data to show that you know, all these studies to show that when wages go up, employment doesn't go down. But here's a really crazy thing. So no one until recently had ever gone back to do this one really common sense thing on the minimum wage, which is to look back for all of history to see what happened when you raised it, right? So the minimum wage was invented in 1938 with the FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act. And so the country has raised the minimum wage 22 times. So a person,
So we have no jobs left, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. Like, so given this theory that if wages rise, employment should shrink, we should have zero employment, right?
Right.
But what you can actually do is you can go back to those 22 times and look at the increase, and then figure out what happened to jobs. So here's the crazy thing: that of the 22 times, unless the country was in recession, jobs went up every single time. Right now, if the country's in recession, of course, you know, there are things which overwhelm that effect, and they go down. But what's super interesting, what surprised even us from the data, is that the more affected the industry was by the wage increase. In other words, hospitality workers are massively affected by a minimum wage increase, but doctors and lawyers aren't. Right?
That's right. That makes sense.
Right?
Yep.
So you would expect, given the orthodoxy, that hospitality employment would go down, would be more negatively affected by the minimum wage. It turns out to be the opposite. Is that the more affected by the increase, the better the industry did. Why? Because that's how capitalism works. Because when workers have more money, businesses have more customers and hire more workers.
So Nick didn't come up with this concept. Henry Ford talked about it all the way back in the day. I got to pay my guys a decent wage so they could buy my car.
Right.
So, but it's since then there's been a tremendous amount of propaganda and counterfactual marketing against it. So let's talk about the phenomenon, though, from economic terms. Now, I think the audience now gets, well, that makes sense. If they've got more disposable income, people are going to spend it more. And if you're a lower wage worker, you spend almost all of the income that you make back into the economy, whereas the rich save a much higher percentage.
Or don't save. Buy $100 million old master painting and stick it on your wall, right? Okay, so you could take that $100 million and spend it, divide it by thousands of families and spend it on haircuts and meals and restaurants and you know, and clothes and so on and so forth, or one blood-sucking venture capitalist can buy a famous painting painted 150 years ago and stick it on their wall, right? Well, which of those activities is going to generate a dynamic economy, right? Now, by the way, I collect paintings. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but if you were going to arrange an economy for maximum dynamism, you definitely want that kind of income flowing through the economy rather than stuck on some wall someplace.
Okay, now, is there a limit to it, though? So, and have we ever come anywhere near the limit? Meaning, if the minimum wage was $99, then perhaps...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the question is, how far can you push it? And no one knows the answer to that question. What we do know is that if you look back in history, the minimum wage sat in relationship to the rest of the economy in particular ways. So as I'm sure you know, so me and my gang, we cooked up the $15 minimum wage. Like somebody had to pick that number, and we did, and we picked it because it was halfway between where the minimum wage would be if it had tracked inflation, which is about 10.5 bucks today, and where it would be if it had tracked productivity gains, and that's about $22. So we know that $15 minimum wage sits in relation to our economy in a way that it did once when the economy was better and middle class and working class people did better, right? So 15 is a very conservative number. But 15 is 50% of the $28, $29 that the minimum wage would be if it had tracked the wages of the top 1%. And I personally think that, and I can't prove this, it's just an intuition, that relationship is the most important one. Because money, the amount of money you have doesn't matter. It's how much you have in relation to other people that defines how you live and how much stuff costs, right? And so I think if it was up to me, what I would do is I would connect the income of the top 1% with the minimum wage. Because if you do that, then everybody wins together, right? The more money the people at the very top make, the better everybody at the bottom makes, and that pushes the wages of the middle up.
And in fact, it would get the 99% to root for the top 1%.
Absolutely. How cool would that be, right? Like, yeah, a modest proposal. Yeah, to link, to link the minimum wage to the income of the top 1%.
Yeah.
And the thing is that, so that number is 28, 29, 30 bucks. And my instinct is that certainly in big cities you could push the minimum wage into that range without undue trade-offs, right? That you would end up, now of course there's going to be trade-offs, right? That industries are going to be reshaped, prices are going to change, there's all sorts of stuff that's going to happen. But my instinct is that reasonable people, if given a choice between those kinds of economies, would choose the one where wages were higher.
Right, and my theory on that is simple too, which is that, yeah, if there is a maximum on the minimum wage you can get to where you would begin to have counterproductive effects, we've never been anywhere near it.
No, we've never seen that. So people think of raising the minimum wage to 15 as this giant, crazy, risky experiment. So here's the thing, is that in every single place where it's currently being implemented, it's being implemented over many years, right? Like, so you're not going from 9 to 15 in one day, you're going from 9 to 15 in 4 or 5 years, California, New York, Seattle, all these different places. But we have run big experiments before. So in 1949, the nation raised the minimum wage 87.5% in one day. Right?
Wow.
A lot, right?
But I remember after 1949, we did not have the #1 economy in the world that flourished. Oh, wait a minute, we did!
Exactly. So unemployment fell from 5.9 to 2.9% in the years following that. So we have run experiments where we have dramatically increased the minimum wage, and the nation did not slide into the ocean. It flourished. Again, because that's how capitalism works. The more money ordinary people have, the better it is for business. And look, so I know that there are business people out there who bridle at this. And look, I've run a lot of businesses, and nobody likes to pay their workers more, right? And every business, I often say that every business owner has the same sort of econo-erotic fantasy. And it's this fantasy. Here's the fantasy. Your fantasy is that you're going to run your business and pay your workers poverty wages. But everybody else is going to run their businesses and pay their workers lots and lots of money. So their workers are going to be able to afford your products, right? Right. And their workers are going to be able to pay taxes into the system, pay for the infrastructure and the food stamps that your workers need. Sadly, your workers will not be able to buy their products or pay taxes into the system, right? Now, I get why you'd want that deal. Who wouldn't want that deal? The problem is if everybody gets that deal, well, we don't have an economy anymore. Who will buy the stuff?
Right. So, well, which is kind of where we are.
Exactly. And so, what economic policy must do is stop that parasitic behavior.
So that's where I was going to get to next. You talk about the parasite economy, and as you were describing that econo-erotic situation, it reminded me of Walmart a little bit.
Absolutely.
So talk to us about Walmart and why that model is broken compared to Costco, et cetera.
Right. So So the thing about our economy is that today we almost have two economies. We have the real economy, where people pay their workers enough for them to be robust participants in the economy, both as consumers and taxpayers, right? And then we have this separate economy I call the parasite economy, where you have these giant profitable corporations mostly who pay their workers so little that they can't robustly participate, either as consumers or taxpayers. Walmart being the canonical example as our nation's largest employer, right? 1.5 million people employed at these poverty wages. They don't pay taxes. They need food stamps. I mean, it's well known now that, you know, in most states, the biggest group of food stamp recipients are actually Walmart workers, right?
So that's amazing. Can we just pause there for 1 second? So a lot of times you'll hear Republicans talking about, like, oh, the Obama came in and food stamps went up, and they make it seem like, oh, he's giving handouts to his voters, to African Americans, et cetera. No, part of the reason food stamps are going up and are at record rates is because the giant corporations that back the Republican Party pay such low wages that their workers require food stamps to survive.
Yeah, no, it's completely nuts. And so Walmart, last numbers I saw, the sort of national federal subsidy flowing to Walmart workers was in the range of $6.5 billion a year. Right?
That sounds like corporate welfare to me.
Yeah, so that's not capitalism. That's socialism for the rich. That's what that is. So Walmart earns $27 billion in pre-tax profits every year. There is no earthly reason why they can't afford to pay their workers the $6 or $7 or $8 billion more a year that it would require for them to not need food stamps, right? And you know, we have as a nation been conned into believing that this arrangement is a necessity. It's not a necessity. It's a preference. Like I said, who wouldn't want that deal?
Right.
If you're running Walmart, why wouldn't you want that? You want the ITC. You want food stamps. You want all these programs. Because if you have all these programs, then you get to socialize the costs of your workers. And I may be a rare among your guests, but I am a hardcore capitalist. I believe in capitalism, but it comes in as many flavors as pie, and dirt pie tastes terrible, and cherry pie tastes good. And this goofy crony capitalism that we have created in our country just makes no sense. There is no earthly reason why companies cannot pay their workers enough for them to live decent lives. And look, there are companies that have predicated their business models on exploiting workers. And those people will either have to change or go out of business. But the great thing about capitalism is someone will come in and do it the right way, right?
Yep.
McDonald's may not be able to make hamburgers for people by paying their workers a decent wage, but somebody will figure out how to do it, and we will not lose our access to hamburgers.
I'm pretty sure we're going to have hamburgers in America.
We're going to be fine, right?
Yeah, but when McDonald's executives hear that kind of talk, they think, oh boy, we got to watch out for Nick. This guy's trouble. But so I want the audience to understand, and McDonald's is obviously a random example, right? If it turns out that McDonald's executives are going to go then buy their politicians and et cetera and argue against Nick, and they're trying to maintain their status and their position, which, as you described, Nick, is anti-capitalist. Yes, once a corporation is born, it's like an Oedipus complex. It immediately wants to kill its parent, which is capitalism. Right? Corporatism, in a lot of ways, is the opposite and the enemy of capitalism. But in a capitalist system, if you're a libertarian, if you're a true conservative or a liberal, you should think, we want competition. And in competition and in capitalism, yes, sometimes companies go under. They are replaced by other companies that do it better.
Absolutely. And now, of course, you know, the incumbents don't want to hear that, right? Like, you know, the good folks at McDonald's want to believe that, you know, the only place that you should buy hamburgers is at McDonald's, and they will do almost everything in their power to make it hard for other people to sell hamburgers. You know, that's human nature. I'm not sure we will ever change that. But as as a society, as a republic, as voters and citizens, we need to be resolute in, defeating those sorts of concentrations of power and influence, because they are not good for the society and they're not good for capitalism, right?
Yep. So just 2 points on solutions.
Yep.
So one is, let's talk about the structure of corporations themselves.
Yeah.
So this is something that I harp on. I don't know if anybody else is talking about it, but I want to run it by you and get a sense of your thoughts on it. We've designed corporations, which are of course legal fictions, to maximize profits. And I think that we built a robot that works too effectively. And so I'm worried that if you write a code for a program like a corporation and say, maximize profit and crush everything in your path, it will crush everything in its path and maximize profit.
Right.
So, because that's what we designed it to do.
Yeah.
So that perhaps we should rewrite the code a little bit. And the question is, of course, how? But for example, in Germany, half of their board is labor, which then creates a much more stable economy, and Germany's economy has been fantastic for decades.
Right. So I half agree with you, and I half disagree with you. The truth is, in my opinion, that we actually did not. So the corporate construct isn't necessarily designed to maximize profits at the expense of everything else. Mm-hmm. What happened in our country over the last 40 years is we perverted the construct into this profit is everything, nothing else matters, craziness. And that's referred to as shareholder capitalism. Mm-hmm. The idea that the only responsibility of management is to maximize the return to shareholders. And this is completely insane. It makes no sense whatsoever. All of the economics which undergirded that idea in the name of efficiency has been discredited. And so this is, as you said, corporations are a fiction, but the society at large grants people the right to be limited of liability. Mm-hmm. But why would you do it if the construct is going to destroy the society, right? Like people mm-hmm. forget that we have corporations at the pleasure of the society.
Yes.
And if corporations don't start to deliver benefits broadly to the society, then the society will almost certainly take away people's right to have corporations. Mm-hmm. and so what happened over 40 years is that companies used to be run for and managed by people who had who felt like the company had a broad set of constituents and needed to satisfy all of those. So there were employees and customers and the community itself, and of course the shareholders. And and the corporate executives felt like they should be well paid, but not infinitely paid, right? Like mm-hmm. all of this is nuts. As you well know, 30, 40 years ago, corporate CEOs made 30, 40 times the wages of the median worker. Now it's 300 times or 400 times or 500 times. That's not because corporate executives got smarter.
Yeah, oftentimes they crash the company and get the same pay anyway.
Right. By definition, 50% of people running companies are complete idiots, right?
They're below average.
They're below average, right?
Uh-huh.
What happened is that we created a culture that validated and supported this idea that people at the top deserve everything and everybody else deserves nothing. And this has nothing to do with economics. It's simply the way in which we instantiate our social and moral preferences about status, privileges, and power. In fact, that's all economics is. It's how we decide who gets what and why. And we have, this whole trickle-down economics thing, this idea that the richer the rich get, the better off everyone will be. And conversely, if the poor get richer, that will be bad for everybody, right? That is imbued in all of our institutions today, which is where we ran off the rails.
Yeah, and I think that one of the, of course, issues is that corporations, of course, have legal rights. Those are the rights that we gave them because they are these legal fictions that we've created, and they make sense. There's a need for limited liability. But then the Supreme Court gave them constitutional rights as if they're human beings with inalienable rights, and that makes no sense whatsoever.
It makes no sense. It makes no sense. And but it's all, but that is all part of seeing the world in this bent way, in my opinion. And the Roberts Court is a trickle-down court, or it was.
Yeah.
It's changing, I think, God willing. Right?
Well, I don't want to get into God's role in what happened, but yes, it was actually the most pro-corporate court in U.S. history, even with its so-called four liberals.
That's right. It's a trickle-down court, and if you look at the rulings, most of them give more power to economic elites and less power to ordinary citizens, and that's operating from a theory, essentially a theory of growth that says that the richer the rich get, the better off everyone will be. And all of this stuff. I mean, the good news is that I'm always an optimist. I think all of this stuff is going to come crashing down over the next 10 years. I mean, the world may be left in rubble, but these so much of the goofiness embodied by neoclassical economics is crumbling right now, and I think the world is ready for a new way to think about what prosperity is, where growth comes from, how capitalism works, and how you build a high-functioning society.
So, Nick, that brings us to our last point, which is that I'm maybe even a bigger optimist, and I think maybe there's a chance to save it before it all crumbles, and we have to rebuild it. I think the answer to saving it is to actually get our democracy back so that we can get capitalism back. And I think the way to get democracy back is to get money out of politics. Because if you can purchase politicians, and we've now basically legalized bribery, saying, oh, you can give unlimited campaign donations or independent expenditures, well, of course, any public corporation that would like to maximize their profit will kill off their competition, and the most efficient way to do that and to give themselves billions of dollars in subsidies and tax breaks is to buy politicians, to buy the government. So if we can get them to stop from buying the government, we might get our representatives back and hence pass sensible laws. So what's your take on that? Is that the core of the issue?
So I think you're exactly right, but I just want to expand it slightly. So because this is the nut of it. This is the most important thing. So and I want to try in as unwonky a way possible is to connect economics and democracy and capitalism and democracy. So if you understand, so the only legitimate source of authority for government is to make people's lives better, right? Which means that the only reasonable purpose of economic policy is to increase the economic welfare of the typical person. And if you're thinking about increasing the welfare of the typical person, then you have to understand what prosperity really is. Well, it's not money, right? It's the accumulation of solutions to human problems. It's delivering stuff to people that makes their lives better. This is why you could be the richest person in the whole jungle, but a working class person is more prosperous than you because they have antibiotics and air conditioning and a comfy bed, right? So growth in a market economy isn't some goofy statistic like GDP that has to do with output. It's the rate at which we improve your lives, improve outcomes for you as a citizen. And what that implies is that the source of growth, where growth comes from in a market economy, is a feedback loop between innovation and demand. And the more of both those things you have, the better things go. Why does this matter? Because the thing that drives that, the thing that fundamentally drives that feedback loop is inclusion. The degree to which we include people as workers, innovators, entrepreneurs, and consumers in our economy. And the only thing that permits inclusion is legitimate democracy. So this is why, so democracy isn't just correlated with prosperity, growth, and stability. It is its cause because it's the only mechanism human societies have ever found to actually include people. And what's super interesting about this is that inclusion is the most accurate predictor today and in all of human history for prosperity, growth, and stability. You show me an inclusive society, a genuinely inclusive society, I will show you prosperity and growth. There are no counterexamples. And so money in politics is the opposite of inclusion. It's exclusion. It's a way of keeping people out right? And that's why these two things are so important. Why getting money out of politics is so crucial. It's not just to save the democracy, it's also to save the economy. So crucial.
All right, Nick Hanauer, you're going to get more of this on his podcast, The Other Washington. Even though it came out in 2007, go check out The True Patriot. A lot of this is in there, and that's why it was a bestseller. Thank you so much for joining us on The Young Turks.
Super fun. Thank you, Drew.
Thank you.